The New Orleans Saints quarterback battle between Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shough, Trevor Penning's transition to left guard, and a brand new defensive scheme are all pivotal to the team's success in 2025, and that's why they are some of the biggest OTA storylines this week. We got all of that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I want to go over 6 of the biggest storylines for New Orleans Saints OTAs. We'll take a look at attendance, injuries. Chris Olave and Rashid, Shaheed, though, made their way back, and they are looking great. We'll dive into the defensive scheme changes that we're waiting to get more details on and should see more of this week. And we're going to lead everything off with the biggest things happening in the New Orleans Saints situation right now. The quarterback battle and the offensive line shuffle, both pivotal to the New Orleans Saints' success in 2025. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode. We appreciate you, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can head over to FanDuel.com and get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. The biggest question for the New Orleans Saints coming out of this offseason is who is going to be the starting quarterback. Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shough, we are back out on the field this week. We'll get our opportunity to see them tomorrow on Thursday. And so I wanted to come through here, give you each of these kind of big storylines, and we'll take a look at 2 things at every storyline. We'll go through the storyline. We'll dive into, as we dive into the storyline, we'll take a look at what we learned last week and what we're hoping to learn this week. So that's going to be the element of all of these things. So what did we learn about Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shough last week? Well, we learned that both of them are talented passers, and especially in 7-on-7 situations where there's no pass rush, right? We only got to see so much, but we did feel like Spencer Rattler took an early step forward in this quarterback competition because of how simply comfortable he was at dominating every level of what he was asked to do. Now, it is important to highlight what he was asked to do. He wasn't asked to go out there and run full team drills. He wasn't asked to go out there and run a 2-minute drill on a 2-minute drive up against an unfamiliar opponent. That's not what we saw, right? We saw individual drills, we saw walkthroughs, we saw run game installs, we saw 7-on-7s. And in each of those opportunities, Spencer Rattler shined. He was quick, he made his decisions quickly, got the ball out quickly, moved through progressions quickly, was able to get in and out of huddles pretty cleanly, ran the operation very clean, no one was lost, no one was confused, communicated clearly, all of those things. And then on top of that, great ball placement, great precision, good work for Spencer Rattler all throughout. And so we saw him take a bit of a step forward while Tyler Shough, unsurprisingly for where he is, remember there's an experience gap here. Spencer Rattler with a year's worth of NFL experience, over 600 more snaps in college football, over 300 more passing attempts in college football. Yes, Tyler Shough spent 2 more years in college than Spencer Rattler did, but doesn't matter. The reps are the experience. The time on task is the experience. And so we certainly saw Spencer Rattler out with a little bit of a head start there. Tyler Shough, though, despite the sort of unfamiliarity with what he was doing, not with what he was doing, but really the hesitation, right? It was hesitation, a little bit of timid nature around it, all things you should expect for a rookie quarterback that's working with vets for the 3rd time in terms of what we saw during that time. Still had the highlight of the day with a big pass down the right sideline to Rashid. Shaheed had other impressive throws as well all throughout. There's a video right now circulating social media from this week's OTAs on Tuesday, a beautifully thrown ball just over the top of Demario Davis, who was back at OTA practice to start off the week. So you can see that both of these passers are very talented. One of them is just in a different place experience-wise than the other. Now, that's what we saw. What are we hoping to see, or what are we looking to see? Well, we want to see if that gap starts to close. How quickly can Tyler Shough start to close that gap. Now, there's a ton of experience difference between these two quarterbacks at this point, so you're not going to expect everything to even up just after 1 week, but how much more comfortable does he look in terms of tracking his progress from week 1 of OTAs, practice number 3, to week 2 of OTAs, practice number 6? Do we see growth? Do we see potential there? We also saw Spencer Rattler taking first team reps. If they're alternating that, then it seems likely that we'll see Tyler Shough taking first team reps. And how does that change the operation, getting in and out of the huddle, the lack of maybe it reduces some of the timid nature, things like that. So how do those things impact? So we'll see, right? We'll see as things move ahead for both of these quarterbacks. Remember, no decisions are going to be made at this time, but it's good to settle and figure out what the foundation these players are working with is so that we can track the growth throughout the next couple of months rather than the next couple of practices. Let's move one step forward from the quarterback to the offensive line. We saw Trevor Penning move to left guard, and then we also saw both of the tackles, Kelvin Banks Jr. as well as Taliesin Fuanga, plug into their college positions of left tackle and right tackle, respectively. So what did we see? We saw a pretty comfortable offensive line look for New Orleans. Banks and Fuanga back in their sort of, I'll call them their customary positions, the places that they had been all throughout college. Fuanga, of course, played left tackle for the Saints last year before being moved over to right tackle. Kellen Moore said that his response was that of a very unfazed person when asked to move over to right tackle. He kind of just went like, yeah, okay, no problem. And so you'll love to see that. And Trevor Penning looked pretty comfortable jumping in at left guard. So now we're finally getting to see, can Trevor Penning make it work as an interior offensive lineman? And look, worst case scenario here is that he gets cross-trained, at guard, and then becomes a player that can be a backup for you that can play both tackle or a guard, can play either spot. And then you move to Dylan Radins and all these other things. But before we get into counting Trevor Penning out, what do you do if he doesn't pan out? Let's see what happens if he does. And I think that that's what we're watching for next. So what we saw was that. What we're hoping to see next is that again. It's not that we want to see anything different. Certainly there's progress that you want to see, but hard to track progress for offensive linemen when there's no contact, no pads, all those other things. The biggest thing for me is Trevor Penning still at left guard, or have they now rotated Dylan Radins in to start getting some of those snaps with the first team? And then if that is the case, why? Why was that decision made? Is that decision made simply because they like to continue the rotation and keep all these guys working with one another just in case? Or is that change made because things don't feel like they're necessarily panning out for Trevor Penning at left guard? And I think you're going to be hard pressed to get anybody to say that to you, at least publicly, the latter side of it. But it is important not just to react to the situation, but the reasons why the situation happened. So we're waiting to see. Is Trevor Penning still at left guard? Is Kelvin Banks still at left tackle? Is Taliesin Fuanga still at right tackle? And if that's all still there, then that's good. That means that things are at least in a rhythm. Things look to be moving ahead. We saw this with Fuanga last year. Started rookie mini camps at left tackle and literally never moved all throughout the rest of the offseason. Do we see the same thing with Penning? Or do we see a little bit of a rotation? And is that rotation for information gathering sake? Or is that rotation because something's not working? That's going to be the other piece we have to dig into on all this. So we're hoping to figure out those questions as well. So those are the two big and most kind of impactful things on the offensive side of the football, quarterback, offensive line, for where the New Orleans Saints are. Now I want to dive over to the defensive side, what we've seen of Brandon Staley's new scheme and what we're hoping to see moving forward. We got that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Man, the NBA playoffs just keep getting more and more interesting. The Knicks are hanging on by a thread, and the Minnesota Timberwolves are trying to hang on. That's the big action tonight in particular. OKC hosting the Minnesota Timberwolves. So with all of the excitement going on around the NBA playoffs, it's a great time to get in on FanDuel today, who are giving you access to everything that you need, whether it's before the tip or live after, same game parlays, live betting, odds lines, player props, player trends that you can track as well. There's a ton for you over at FanDuel today. And it's a great time to get started if you're a new customer, because over at FanDuel.com, new customers You get $200 in bonus bets if you place your first $5 bet and it wins. Right now, OKC 8.5-point favorites up against Minnesota tonight. A nice heavy favorite for you to put that first $5 down on the money line. If you win that, then you get that $200 in bonus bets. So go ahead and get started with FanDuel today. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints offense, of course, is going to be getting a lot of attention this offseason, but the changes over on defense can be just as impactful when it comes to building success for this team. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this team needs to be a playoff team in 2025 because of how good its defense is, but an evolution in this New Orleans defense, which has began to feel a little bit more antiquated over the course of the past couple of years. That little bit of an update or facelift was certainly something that this defense needed, and we're starting to see it already from defensive coordinator Brandon Staley. So we're going to take a look at the defense and its scheme. We're going to take a look at what we've seen, what we want to see, and then we'll also take a look at cornerback and the depth chart there, what we've seen, and what we're curious about as things continue on with OTAs this week. So starting off with the defensive scheme, we've seen the things that I think you expected to see. Stand-up edge rushers, multiple fronts, including more odd fronts of 3 down linemen, nose tackles lined up nose to nose with the center. Inside linebackers as a delineation different from the edge rushers as the outside linebackers. Some of the pass rushers dropping back into coverage. Like, we're seeing all of the things that you expect to see from what would be a more predominant 3-4 defense. I still wouldn't call the Saints under Brandon Staley a 3-4 defense. I'd still very much call them a multiple front defense. But of those multiple fronts, you might see more odd man fronts or 3-man fronts than you're accustomed to seeing. We also saw some 2-man fronts, which included 2 down linemen and 2 stand-up edge rushers over on the outside, which then allowed them to be able to have 2 linebackers and 5 DBs. So you still implored or deployed both of those stand-up pass rushers, but went to effectively a 4-2-5, but it's a little bit of a different structure. All these things I think are positive. All these things I think are good. Try, install, play with new ideas, all these other things that you might be able to try out here when it comes to what Staley is installing. Not all of it might actually make it to the 2025 playbook. The common sense approach that this New Orleans Saints coaching staff has taken has been remarkably consistent. If it doesn't work for the players, then don't do it, period. But you got to try some things. You got to figure things out, all those other things. You're going to see a lot of that over the course of OTAs, maybe even some of training camp and everything. Then it'll be interesting to see kind of where things move as they move forward. The other thing that you're seeing is a lot of working like pattern matching and things like that. And so instead of coverage players just being assigned man-to-man, you guard me, the thing that they're doing instead is more pattern matching. So instead, they'll kind of start off in a zone, wait to see how the combinations and route combinations are run by the wide receivers on either side of the field. And then based on whether they're in breaking or out breaking or whatever other rules they have set for the demarcation of when it kind of transitions over to man-to-man coverage, then they make those adjustments. So if your responsibility is the player that's on an in-breaking route, and your other corner's responsibility that's lined up next to you, if you're in the slot or if they're in a stacked formation on the outside, whatever it might be, if their responsibility is the player that goes on the outside or that has an outbreaking route, I might start on the inside. But if I'm the receiver that runs the outbreaking route, I become that player's responsibility and not your responsibility. And then the other player becomes your responsibility. So it's like certain things like that you just sort of figure out and kind of learn how to install in a new way. And then there's other rules to it. What if they push vertically? What if both go outside? All these other things. Like there's a lot of different rules to it. But the thing about it, and the reason why I love it, and it reminds me of sort of the Saban era, Rip Liz defense, right-left defense. Somebody's going right, somebody's going left. That a lot of it was just about waiting to kind of see what the offense was doing and then responding to that in the moment. So everything had a strict set of rules. If this happens, you do this. If this happens, you do this. If this happens, you do this. And then you drill it and drill it and drill it and drill it. So you're not thinking about it anymore, and you're just reacting immediately based on what's happening. So quick twitch muscles, all that other kind of work is going to be really, really important in this Brandon Staley defense. And of course, study. Lots and lots and lots of study, which is going to be necessary for both sides of the football under Kellen Moore's offense as well as Brandon Staley's defense. What are we wanting to see as we move forward? just continue to see them work more pieces and continue to see the rotation. I think a guy like Vernon Broughton's kind of getting lost in the shuffle of the rookie class this year, but his connection to Bo Davis, New Orleans Saints defensive line coach, they were together at Texas, and then now he comes in and sort of is immediately in this heavy rotation of playing a little bit of nose tackle, playing a little bit of 3-4 defensive end, moving around a little bit. He could become a pretty sizable contributor for this team in a way that maybe people don't think, because he's at an unsexy position of defensive tackle, and he wasn't one of the biggest defensive tackle names that was on the board at the time that he was drafted. And so, like, looking to see how these players are benefiting from the system, because the more that the players benefit from the system, the more the system gets imprinted. If the players aren't benefiting, then the system's, they're going to change things. And so we'll see where things go with all that. So that'll be a big part of what I'm keeping an eye out on this week. Now I want to jump over to the cornerback depth chart, because I do think that it's interesting, and we still don't necessarily know all the players that are involved in this conversation. So what do we know already? Kool-Aid McKinstry is a lock to start on the outside, and Alontae Taylor is going to move around. I think those are the things that we know. Those are the things that we've seen. Kool-Aid playing on the outside in base sets, accompanied by maybe Alontae playing on the outside in base sets, but then Alontae Taylor moving inside during nickel sets. And so if that is the case, who takes the outside nickel reps? Well, during last week's practice, we saw Isaac Yiadom there. No surprise with that. 2023, he was a standout for this team while the team was managing injuries at the position. They were without Marshawn Lattimore. They were without Paulson Adebo for portions of the season. The team is now permanently without both Marshawn Lattimore and Paulson Adebo. Isaac Yiadom is back after having a year in San Francisco where he worked with Brandon Staley, who was the assistant head coach and still worked with the secondary during that time. So there's a little bit of a connection there. But what happens once Quincy Riley is healthy and is back out on the field? He's managing a recovery right now from a post-draft procedure that is minor, according to head coach Kellen Moore. And so when Quincy Riley is ready to be back out on the field, how does that impact Isaac Yiadom? So that's going to be part of what we're watching for this week. Is Quincy Riley back? If so, how does that impact Isaac Yiadom? If the answer is that Quincy Riley is not back, then Yiadom stays on the outside, and this kind of three-man front continues to gain its chemistry. Then a much later question than OTAs becomes what happens in July when Asante Samuel Jr., former Chargers running back, who is a part of Brandon Staley's first ever draft class as a head coach and has already visited the Saints this offseason. What happens if he gets cleared from his offseason neck procedure? Do the Saints go after him? And then does he become another competitor in the bout? Remember, he's coming off of neck surgery. He's coming off of, I think it was a 4-game season that he played last year. It's not going to be a massive contract for him. He's looking to land somewhere to prove it. And landing back with Brandon Staley is a spot that makes sense. Saints can bring him in without overly investing and then see where things go. He's also 25, 26 years old at most. And so really good investment potentially that could still be on the way. So not only are we waiting to see what happens with the cornerback depth chart this week, we're waiting to see what happens with it even going into July as well. So lots of moving parts for that. Coming up next, Rashid, Shaheed, and Chris Olave impressed last week, and I think they're going to be ready to impress again this week. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. 2 wide receivers saw their seasons end prematurely last year. Chris Olave dealing with numerous head injuries and concussions. I split the two because there were only 2 confirmed concussions, but he did get checked for a head injury at a different time. So I do separate those 2 things. And then we also saw Rashid Shaheed go under the knife, meniscus surgery that turned into a larger surgery. Kind of had 2 pathways that surgery could go. It went the one way that ended up ending his season, basically. And both those players were back out on the field last week and were just as fast and free and fun as ever. Those guys attacking the middle of the field, running crossing routes, running deep routes, being all over the place and being able to contribute in a bunch of different ways all throughout those practices. And neither of them looked like they had lost a step. Now, some context here is worth mentioning that, especially when it comes to Chris Olave. Remember, he returned to practice at the end of last season as well. He never returned to game action, but he did return to practice. So him not being in a helmet and pads and stuff like that, well, he was last year. We'll have to see what happens when a helmet and pads go back on Rashid Shaheed. But we've also watched Rashid Shaheed manage this before. Remember, he came into the NFL with a lower leg injury that kept him sidelined during portions of the offseason and then didn't get a real opportunity until like later on in the season. I think it was up against the Bengals in that big game where he had a 50-plus yard jet sweep touchdown run and all those other things. And so we've seen Rashid Shaheed manage this kind of adversity and come out on the right side of it already so far in his career. And I think he looks ready to do it again. Both of them looked outstanding. I've got targets to Chris Olave in the, crossing the field from one side to the other. I think you're going to see a lot of these crossers in Kellen Moore's offense, which I think is something that will be great to see back in the New Orleans Saints offense as well. I've got one on an intermediate crosser that he was targeted in the middle of the field. I've got another one that was by Spencer Rattler. I've got another completion to him by Tyler Shough that was in the middle of the field. I mean, just the usage of him at all three levels during this practice, as well as the usage of him as a crosser, get him running laterally and utilizing that speed. All of that was there. The first completion of the day in 7-on-7s was from Spencer Rattler to Rashid Shaheed. The third completion for Tyler Shough was to Rashid Shaheed on a crosser going left. Same similar kind of concept to what we saw a couple plays before with Chris Olave. Then we saw that big pump and go down the right sideline that would have been a touchdown to him. Rashid Shaheed was targeted. I've got him charted as targeted three times, and each pass was caught, including a couple of bigger downfield plays as well. So, I mean, both of these guys coming in already look very ready to contribute, rebound from their situations in the disappointing way that their seasons ended last year, which nobody wanted for either of those players that to be the way that their seasons wrapped up. And then now they come out of that and they look ready to go. Like they look as quick as ever. They look as confident as ever. And remember that sort of that mental side of recovery is just as big as the physical side of recovery. Can you trust yourself getting hit? Can you trust yourself cutting on your changing directions on that knee? Can you trust yourself diving to the ground for a pass in either situation, like all these other pieces? And these guys just seem so fearless and so ready to get back out on the football field. So now as we go into this week, what is it that I want to see? Just more of that. Kind of similar to what we talked about with the offensive line. I don't necessarily need to see anything change. I just want to see it be consistent. And if those guys continue to be consistent contributors as pass catchers, and then also find a way to be impactful in the run game, neither of which the biggest guys when it comes to being blockers, but both of them very willing to block. And sometimes that's all it takes. I think we make a big deal out of smaller guys on the perimeter blocking, but the smaller guys on the perimeter blocking are blocking smaller guys out on the perimeter. They're not blocking defensive linemen. And if they are, it doesn't matter if you're 6'4" or you're 6'1", you're probably losing as a wide receiver. And so we'll see, like, can they be the missing ingredient by just being kind of willing participants in the game plan? And so if everybody buys in, which it feels like everybody's doing right now, then everybody's going to be wondering how to contribute for everything. And so they'll find their way in when it comes to all that. So just looking forward to seeing, more health for those guys, more comfort for those guys, and more impact from those guys as they continue on. And kind of similar to that, as I wrap up here, I want to take a look at attendance and a little bit of the injury conversation, right? These two guys are guys that suffered injuries last year but made it back. And the Saints are without 5 players right now that are specifically dealing with injury. Taysom Hill, Foster Moreau. Then we know the new injury for Jake Haener. We don't know the details on the injury just yet, but Dallin Holker was in a boot. Then all of a sudden he wasn't. So he looks to be making progress. And then, of course, right now, Quincy Riley coming back off of that post-draft procedure that Kellen Moore says is very minor. And so looking at all of those players, really, like, only one of them seems to have been a practice injury, and that was Jake Haener, who had the oblique strain at the beginning of last week that might limit him or at least keep him out for all of OTAs. So with that, everybody else is kind of dealing with stuff that's kind of pre-existing, right? Taysom Hill, Foster Moreau, injuries from last year. Dallin Holker, we're not sure yet, but I can tell you that during rookie mini camps, he was dealing with something. So it was before OTAs. And then with Quincy Riley, it's a previously existing situation that was a procedure that they got done with him after the draft. And so everything kind of pre-exists the OTAs in this practice period outside of Jake Haener, whose injury doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal just yet. So it's going to keep him out, but it's not something that's going to like limit him through training camp or anything of that like. So do we see any progress in these players returning from injury, right? Do we see Quincy Riley back out on the field? Do we see Dallin Holker back out on the field participating a little bit more? What's the progress of Foster Moreau as they continue through? Like, no one expects him to be ready during OTAs, but he was still out there and he was still working with some of the other tight ends and everything like that. Like, he was still very much a part of his position group. The other things that we did see attendance-wise last week, there were some veterans that were there. There were some veterans that weren't there. It's okay. It's voluntary. These are OTAs. But a couple of the veterans that weren't there last week, at least, and I want to be very careful about how I say this because we only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know, right? And so we only saw Thursday's practice, and we only saw a minute's worth of footage for each of the Tuesday and Wednesday practices. And so what I can comfortably say is I did not see Demario Davis or Chase Young during last week's OTAs. That doesn't mean that they weren't there. I just ain't see them. But what we can say absolutely confidently now is that both Chase Young and Demario Davis were in the Saints 1 minute highlight reel of their Tuesday OTA practice. So it looks like a step forward in terms of some additional veteran presence during that time, which I do think has value, although not something that ends the world of this team if they aren't present. So just some good news there, seeing both Demario Davis and Chase Young back in attendance. And I expect that we'll continue to see some of the other veterans that were there last week still there. So now just getting an eye on them, especially in the new offense, that could be a ton of fun as well. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, some final notes on what we're looking for at Thursday's OTAs and why the New Orleans Saints' biggest move had nothing to do with players or coaches that they acquired this offseason. We got all that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much. As always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, let me know how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.